Good morning. Welcome to the Western Community Assessment Network Peer Learning Housing Solutions Roundtable. My name is Lori Higgins. I'm a professor, sociologist, and community development extension specialist at University of Idaho, and the WCAN conductor, I suppose, and WCAN is Western Community Assessment Network. Before we dive into our amazing lineup of speakers who will share all kinds of housing solutions that can work in rural communities, I'll explain a little bit about how we got here, answer the question you might have, who are these people, and introduce our moderator and Zoom keeper, both of which have been doing a whole lot of heavy lifting to make this roundtable happen. Then our moderator, Michelle, will talk about the agenda and Zoom keeping, and we will jump into our program. But as an initial reminder, please keep yourself muted until you get into your breakouts. Much appreciated. We're expecting about 250 people, so it can get a little bit unwieldy if we have some background noise. So, go ahead to the next slide. WCAN is a 3-state team of land-grant university extension faculty and community assessment delivery organizations and their partners. We came together 5 years ago primarily to evaluate and tweak our community assessment practices to make them more effective at helping rural communities in the 3 states. These programs have been in place for more than 20 years and combined have worked with more than 150 rural communities across Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, some of them twice or 3 times. Somebody should put the URL to our website in the chat if that hasn't happened yet. It was supposed to be on the slide, but I don't see it. There is so much more information there. Our Zoom keeper, Marcy, also keeps our website up to date and with tons of information and resources. So in addition to those community assessments, those community reviews that we've been doing together, we also have a peer learning network that we support. Many of the community leader members of the peer learning networks participated in community reviews in their communities, and they now come together monthly to share community leadership experiences, practices, questions, and their hopes for their communities with other leaders around the region. Now, coming this spring, we will have a new program, the WCAN Community Bootcamp, which will help ad hoc teams from communities around the 3 states. They can already have gone through community reviews, but that's not required, to build capacity to take a community project from start to finish. And we will be sending more information out about that if you're interested following the roundtable. We also conduct applied research and we develop resources for rural communities like this roundtable and tools like the Housing Resource and Housing Basics Guides. Next slide. So you've received the Housing Solutions Resource Guide. And we wanted you to have that because it's hard to know where to go for housing solution resources. And so in this, we really focused on community level solutions primarily, like for organizations and nonprofits, developers, agencies, and communities looking to start some projects. But we also included some renter and home buyer assistance information for each of the 3 states and at the national level, because we know there's so much need for it right now. And as you start working on housing solutions in your community, you may have an opportunity to direct someone to the support that's available. So we hope you find that useful. Eric Kingston with Idaho Housing and Finance, housing evangelist, WeCan team member, and senior in training, single-handedly created the Housing Basics Guide that Marcy is going to put in the chat for you to download. It's designed to help rural leaders understand housing dynamics and begin to identify suitable solutions for their communities. So that's a bonus that we are making available just today. It will also be on our website if you want to get it from there. Our planning team for the roundtable includes WeCan team and Peer Learning Network members who have done an incredible job of pitching in to pull all of this together. In addition, I'd like to thank our Peer Learning Network conveners and facilitators, John Barrett and Melissa Hamilton in Idaho, Gloria O'Rourke and Michelle Archie in Montana, and Julie Daniels in Wyoming. Our Zoom keeper extraordinaire is Marcy Miller, and when she's not chasing her toddler daughter around the Moscow farm that she and her husband run, she is busy being a graduate student working on a master's degree, keeping all the WeCan ducks in a row, and collaborating with me on a regional artisan tourism project. Our moderator today is Michelle Archie, but she is so much more. She is a principal of the Harbinger Consultancy and grew up in Montana, so she comes by her place in this 3-state project honestly. She helps conservation, heritage, economic development organizations collaborate with small towns and rural communities and helps these communities work together in regional collaborations. Particularly relevant to our work in WeCan, she's co-chair of the National Geotourism Council and a longtime associate of the Kettering Foundation. She's been an incredible asset to WeCan, and I can honestly say it wouldn't be what it is without her. Before I turn things over to her, I'd like us to get a little more familiar with who's in the Zoom room. First, if you can change your name on the screen to also include your organization or town and 2-letter state abbreviation, that would help us all as we go on through the day, get a sense of who's with us. Next, I'll give you a prompt here, and I'm putting the instructions for changing your name in the chat. I'll give you a prompt and ask you to type your answer in the chat, but then wait to hit send until I tell you. And this is how we're going to conduct several chatterfalls throughout the morning. So it's important that you wait to hit send until we tell you to hit send. So the prompt is, what is your name, location, affiliation, and one word that comes to mind when you think of housing? Give you a moment to type that in. Whoop, don't hit send yet. Or return, whatever the. Okay, go ahead. Woohoo! That's what you call a chatterfall, folks. All right. Michelle, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. So I'm Michelle Archie. Somewhere way up in the scroll of the chat, you can figure out who I am. So I just want to do some super quick stuff, and then we want to dive into our speakers. So the agenda today going forward, we have 9 really amazing speakers with us today. 2 we're going to be spending a bunch of time with, our keynote presenters, and we'll introduce them as they come up. In between the keynote presenters, we're going to break out into some small breakout rooms just for a moment to breathe and reflect a little bit. We'll be using breakout rooms throughout. A 5-minute, really just a short stretch break partway through. And then we will go into 7 speakers from communities around Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming who are going to tell some stories about how local folks are making progress on housing in rural communities. Or a little bit later this afternoon, depending on where you are, we'll be going into breakout rooms that are divided up by topics, and you'll have a chance to pick what topic or what person you want to follow up with. A lot of them, all of them have resource people, many of whom you'll get to hear in the next little bit here. And then we're just going to wrap up and talk about what's next. And, you know, our hope is that you come away from this having some more new, different, and maybe better ideas about what you can do from where you sit on housing solutions in your own community. So in the course of this, if you have any tech questions, send a chat directly to Marcy Miller. But if it's really bad, email her, marcymiller@uidaho.edu. If, as Lori mentioned, if we can all keep ourselves muted during the course of this when we're all in the main room, that will be really helpful. It's been super quiet and we really appreciate that. Please type any questions in the chat when we get to Q&As because we've got so many people that it's just going to get loud if we try to facilitate it and have folks say their questions out loud. But the breakout rooms are where you really get to talk to each other. So we're going to be a little bit controlling in this main room. And you know, if you do have a warbly audio or frozen video, you can just turn off your video. It usually helps to kind of free up bandwidth and clear that up. So as we go along, we'd really like to be interacting as much as possible. So if you're a chat person, if you love the chat, please use it to share insights, to share ideas, to share resources. If you put resources in the chat, we will harvest them out of the chat afterwards. So if you have links or any advice about how to find these resources, that would be great to include if you're putting resources in the chat. And we will be recording, we are recording this, we'll post the video online and let you know when that's available, as well as all of these resources. Most of the breakout chats where you're automatically put into a breakout room are not going to be recorded. So if something winds up in the chat there, just make sure you make a note of it for yourself, because we won't have access to those the chats from those little breakout rooms. This afternoon, it'll be different with the larger breakout rooms where we go by topic. So, and if you do put something in the breakout chat that you want to share with everybody, just come back when you come back to the main room and put it in that chat, and that way we'll have it. So speaking of these breakout rooms, as I mentioned, we're going to have short, small group breakout sessions throughout the morning. And the rooms, you're going to be with the same group every time. So they're really short, 5 or 10 minutes to basically just do some reflection together. And the fourth and final breakout session is going to be a little bit longer, and you'll be able to pick the room that you want based on the topic that most interests you. And I just ask you to be generous with each other in the breakout rooms because they are really short. So if you've got something to say it. If you are taking a lot of airspace, your breakout roommates might ask you to let one of them have a word in edgewise. So that's basically what we're up to today. And I am going to turn it back over to Lori for a first question to get our heads around this. And then we're going to dive into our first speaker.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So again, this is another Chatterfall. So I'll give you the prompt and ask you to wait to hit return or send. so that people aren't looking at the answers that are coming up while they're trying to type their own. You did give us some of this kind of information in your registration, but with 250 people signing up, we have not yet compiled all of that, but we will, and we will send it out. And I noticed that someone asked to give the option to save the chat. We have to make everybody co-hosts, but we will be saving the chat and mining that and compiling that and sending that out to you later, so you won't lose anything. And I apologize, it's the way University of Idaho sets up their Zoom. So here comes your prompt again. Hold on to your answers until I say go. What is going on in your local housing market? What problem or problems are you solving for? Okay, go. This is great. Great, thank you, everybody. Okay, we're gonna dive right in. So our first speaker this morning is Jenn Lopez, who is the founder and president of Project Moxie, a Durango-based affordable housing and homelessness strategy consultancy firm specializing in strategic planning across the housing continuum. Project Moxie also provides pre-development services for nonprofits, local governments, and organizations at all stages of the development process. Project Moxie is based on Jenn's more than 2 decades of experience working in housing and homelessness programming. She's provided technical assistance to develop affordable housing in New Mexico, Colorado, and California. In 2019, she helped facilitate the first affordable housing investment strategy for the Colorado Health Foundation, which is the 4th largest health foundation in the country. Jenn brings significant experience as well as affordable housing finance and program development to her work with local communities. In 2021, she co-chaired a task force for Senator Bennett to develop a national housing policy framework. And between 2014 and 2017, Jenn worked across Colorado's state agencies as the Director of Homelessness Initiatives for Governor Hickenlooper, implementing outcome-based policies and programs to prevent and end homelessness in Colorado. Thank you for being here, Jenn. Take it away.
Hello, good morning. So grateful to be with you all and excited to share some ideas with you. Michelle, will you go ahead and go to the first slide? You all heard everything about me, but a little bit more personal. I'm from Iowa originally. I moved to Durango, sight unseen, when I was 18 and fell in love with Southwest Colorado. Ended up in New Mexico for a number of years for grad school, but I'm a rural girl by heart. So anything rural, when I got this invitation, I said, oh yeah, I want to do this. So thanks. Next slide. My organization was started in 2018. We have a website. I'm not going to talk a lot about what we do. You're welcome to look at the website. But the points here that I want to share that are really essential to long-term sustainable housing solutions is having it be community driven. I'll talk about what that means. Focusing on results, keeping things simple. I think in housing, we're really good at making things complicated. I'm a big fan of keep it simple, and we'll see if I do a good job trying to explain that today. Being creative around resource development. Right now is a great time to be doing this work. There's a lot of innovation. And then we've got to work with public sector right now. We always talk about public-private partnerships, but it really is the core right now to how we get some stuff done. Next slide. I have a team. I have a land use consultant, a director of engagement. We work across the continuum from unhoused to workforce housing. So it's great to have a diverse team. Next slide. And just a little bit about some of the projects we're working on today. We've got a few supportive housing projects we're working on in rural communities. We do a lot of tax credit development work with employers. I'll talk about some projects here in Durango. A lot of what I'll do today, I like to talk about ideas and then give a very concrete example. So most of my examples will come from my work in the last year, and I'm grateful to be working in my hometown again. So you hear a lot about Durango. We also do, we're working on a couple motel conversions, strategy work, policy work. Next slide. So again, I really love doing this work, especially when it's centered and when it begins with community. You'll get a very different outcome than if you start anywhere else. What I mean by that is, I'll give an example. I work with a Black congregation in Aurora, Restoration Christian Fellowship, an incredible group of people. Been working with them for 2 years. Their mission, their vision for their neighborhood is very specific. They're in a part of Metro Denver that's being gentrified, and we're getting ready to put in an application for 150 housing units. It's much more centered. The design, the services, the vision of the campus is centered in that neighborhood and in that church's vision for how they want to serve. So when you start with community, it just, everything changes. So I'll try to give some examples of that. And but if we're focused on community, really what the task is at hand is helping to translate resources and opportunities, be that technical assistance provider to that community group, helping them find the right team of experts to work alongside them. So much of the work that we do is we work with a community organization and they have land or a resource, and we bring in a mission-driven development and create a partnership. And at the end of the partnership, not only do we have housing, but we have increased capacity and assets for that nonprofit partner. And then we get a lot more interesting when we listen to community. I did a homeless strategy for my hometown a couple of years ago, and we went into the unhoused, the homeless camps, and had interviews, and it really changed the direction of our strategies in our community. So next. Right now, I mean, we've talked about this for a long time. I've been in this field for 20 years, but really this is so important right now, right? So you're going to hear me say, I don't like the term affordable housing anymore because it really is so antiquated. I'm going to use it today because it is a technical term and a funding term, and we have to use it if we want to get resources. But really what we say now in the industry is it's about housing affordability, right? So this is the rainbow, the bridge of housing affordability across the continuum from folks who are earning less than $17,000 a year, who probably are unstably housed or might be in transition, all the way to folks making, you know, 100,000. In my community, if you make 130,000, 140,000, you still can't buy a house, right? That's new to my community. But anyway, the work that we do at the community level really needs to think about it in this continuum. Next. I'm going to touch really fast on a little bit about what's happening in the housing market. I would love to set the context today for the rest of the conversations you're having and try to have some shared understanding about where we're at in 2022. I'm going to touch a little bit on terminology. I know you've got some resources around terminology, but I'm going to share why I think it's so important today. Talk about some strategies, specifically how to develop strategy, and then questions and answers. I will admit I talk fast. I don't mean to, but I do. And so, but part of why I do that is we're trying to cover a lot of information, and I really love the Q&A. So I try to get through this context stuff as fast as I can because I want to have a conversation. Next slide. All right, national housing market. I always say this, we've never been here, ever. We you know, 2009, we had a different kind of crisis, you know, even the Dust Bowl in the 30s, the Great Depression, different. This is brand new. So this is a time for adaptive leadership. What I mean by that is we have a different scale of the problem, a different kind of problem. And so we don't really know all the solutions, to be quite honest. And it's a time to create teams at the local level and come up with some new ideas. You know, yes, wages are increasing, but they're never going to catch up to the 20+% increase jump we had last year in housing costs. People are debating, you know, is this year, are we going to see an increase at 7%, 10%, or 12%? Whatever it is, it's not good. Interest rates are going to start to raise. The only good side of interest rates rising is we might see a little bit of a decrease in the investor markets in our communities. But the takeaway here really is we got to start building, and we got to build now. For years in our industry, we would never say, you can build your way out of the problem. we got to build. I mean, it's just fundamental right now to build units in most of our communities. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the local market in Durango, just as an example. And I suspect many of these communities, your beautiful places, your rural, your tourism environment, people want to come to your communities. Not all of you, but many of you have are in desirable tourism destinations. What we have found in our local community, we have 2 weeks of supply. We have a $1 million average sales price for the first time ever in the history of our community. When I went online this week, just out of curiosity, there were maybe 6 mobile home parks and $5 million homes. So I'm going to talk about why that's happening right now, but just to kind of think about what's happening in your community. That's why we had that as a prompt. Be thinking about your community as we go through these slides. Next. So that was the question, right? I think throughout the day, to get the most out of this time together and these incredible sessions that you're going to have, try to answer these questions, right? What's happening in your housing market? What does housing affordability mean to you? What would an equitable housing market mean in your community? What would it look like? Next slide. So what's happening? What's causing demand right now, right? So again, I think most of us know, but I want to make sure we all have the same information for our work today. COVID, right? COVID has impacted in so many ways. So for some of us, it's been an increase. We've gotten a lot of people from Denver in Durango who can work anywhere now, right? The Zoom boom. And that's eaten up some of our inventory. And the truth is we weren't building, right? We stopped building during COVID or slowed way down. We also had some land use regulatory issues for years that kept it, made it more difficult to build and keep up with demand. So we already started with a 10-year lag. Supply chain issues, right? I was on a call yesterday for a project. It might take us 6 months out to get, different types of materials for our builds right now. Inventory is challenging for a number of reasons. There's a lot of demand and interest in these markets in the West, right? We don't have labor, or if we do have labor, we don't have the supplies. So just lots of mismatches there. We also oftentimes will have just a general market mismatch, right? And I'll have a slide that kind of illustrates this in a minute, right? But what the private sector can build to without any subsidy is, because of how expensive it is, lands us at these higher house prices. And without public intervention, thoughtful partnership, we can't get those prices down. So we'll talk about how to do that. And we've had a mismatch between wages and housing costs in many communities for over 20 years, and it's just really caught up with us. Next. Okay, but I do have to talk about affordable housing because I want to make sure, and if folks are new to this conversation around this term, it is a technical term, right? And it refers to the idea that folks should not pay more than 30% of their income for rent, mortgage, and utilities. I have a lot of slides. I'm going to go very quickly, but one of the slides I normally show is why 30% is an important number. Healthcare, transportation, all the other things we have to pay for, right, will suffer if we're paying more for housing, and a lot of us know that. Regulated affordable housing, I'm being very specific, is when we go after public funding and we have an income restriction, some kind of restriction on that unit or that subsidy that's going to that person. And then naturally occurring affordable housing is the idea. I'll talk about the Eastern Plains of Colorado. We have lots of stock over there selling for under 200,000. The challenge in that stock is it's not in very good shape, but that would be naturally occurring affordable housing. So no subsidy, it's just naturally available at those prices. Next slide. Just to give an example of the area median income, again, area median income is a term that's created by Housing and Urban Development, which is our biggest funder for housing. Federal funds pay for housing programs 10 to 1 against state funds typically. So the federal government really does drive this industry. And so this is an example from La Plata County of different area median income, the amount people make, the household size. And this is how we determine whether somebody can qualify for help, for a public subsidy. Next slide. But this one, you'll have to keep pushing it, Michelle. It's fancy. It's going to shoot stuff out. Thank you. I want to talk about language. Language is really important right now. We're seeing all kinds of diverse sectors coming together around housing because we are in a crisis. We're in a national crisis right now. But if we don't have the same understanding of what we're talking about, we go sideways very quickly. So I'm working on a strategy in my community, and the first thing I did with them is I said, let's get clear on the language we're going to use. So workforce housing is often a local term, but force people to define it. What do they mean when they say workforce housing? What's the income? Who's it for? Middle income housing has become really popular in Colorado. Our state agencies use this to define the 80% area median income to 120 area median income, which is households making between 50, 60,000 to 100,000. Or you'll hear the missing middle. So that's a very specific term in my state. Community housing, again, ask people what they mean. I think it's an interesting term as long as you define it. A lot of people, what they're trying to get at here is local. How do we create diverse housing types for people who live here full time and make it make our community work? Attainable housing is a term we've used down here for 20 years and we're moving away from because I don't really think it has the meaning it used to. And then if you hit Michelle again, we should have one more term come out. So I find people really understand below market housing. It seems to be a little less charged than these other terms, and it means what it means, right? So we want to create housing that's below the current market rates because those aren't working for us. And so below market can be lots of things, but it's a strategy to subsidize housing one way or the other for the folks that we want to serve. All right, next slide. Strategy and tools. Okay, here's where we see if I'm doing a good job trying to keep this simple. Really, when you do a housing strategy in your community, you're going to do one of a couple things. You're either going to subsidize developments, right? So you're going to provide funding, you're going to donate land, you're going to have, you might subsidize construction, you might subsidize the financing that's used to create that building or to manage the long-term debt on that building, but you're just subsidizing a building, a unit. Or you're subsidizing a household, right? So when we subsidize households, we might give somebody a Section 8 voucher so that they can go find something in the open market and the voucher pays the difference between what they can afford and what the rent is. Mortgage assistance, we use this all the time. If we want to help people get into home ownership, we'll give them a second mortgage that gaps the difference between what they can afford and their income. So that's it, housing strategy. Are we subsidizing units or are we subsidizing people? Next. This is a little complicated, so let me see if I can do this, but this is a traditional multifamily rental project in a rural community in Colorado. And this is the question I get most often when the private sector comes to me and they say, hey, I'm a builder or I have land, I want to develop, but how are you going to make this work for me? Because it costs 8.8 million, right? It costs a lot of money to build. Where does the subsidy come from to make this work? This is an example of a low-income housing tax credit, which is a very common program we use to build housing. All I want you to see here is it's an $8.8 million project, and it really doesn't work. We have an $8.5 million gap here to make it work because we're keeping the incomes low. So again, public programs are pretty critical to being able to make that difference up between what it costs to develop and what people can afford to rent. I'm going to skip the next slide because I think these are a bit technical, but they're a resource there for you in the future. This one I will keep. This one, Michelle, thank you. This is a nice just snapshot. And again, this is multifamily. I'll talk about single family later. But in multifamily development and rental development, on the left side is a conventional property. I'm building 40 units in my hometown. You traditionally are putting a lot of debt on that property, a little bit of your own equity in, and then the rents are going to pay off your debt, right? Very simple. As you move across the continuum to the right are different public financing tools, different tax credit programs that provide that, take the place of the debt. They become equity in a project. The less debt you have, the lower your rents. So again, this is the main strategy we use for rental housing in our country right now. Is these tax credit programs. I won't go into too much more detail, but I know we've got some finance authority folks from different states on, and I'm sure they're like, yep, we sure do use this program a lot. Next. One more, Michelle. All right, again, trying to keep this fairly simple and straightforward. When we do housing strategies for communities, this is how we create strategy, right? So we do a lot of interviews at the beginning of a project. We're identifying the community's vision. Who do you want to be, right? We got to start, who does this community want to be? I was in a vision meeting about 10 years ago in Durango, and somebody in the meeting said, you know, I just want to make sure we don't get too fancy. And I thought that is such a great, how many of us don't want our communities to get so fancy, right? It was a really perfect thing to say about Durango at that time. And then, so what do we want to be as a community? What resources do we have in the community? What's our existing capacity? The other key things that we assess when we go into communities, where's the political will? It's wonderful when we have a lot of political will. And if we don't, we can still do stuff, right? So there's always ways to be working on things. It's a lot easier with political will though. And then where's the creativity in the community? Where are the potential partnerships? Next slide. As an industry, as a housing consultant, we have a number of tools that we use. And I don't want to get into a lot of these details today, but this is the kind of thing that we bring to your community and we work with you to help figure out what works in your community. The big takeaway here is these larger buckets, right? You can have an incentive-based program. You can have a partnerships, public initiatives type program. You can do a lot with your existing regulations. And you can do lots with bringing more resources to your community. So again, we're in this crazy moment. I have a slide coming up about how much funding is available. But I will also say this, all the funding in the world won't solve the problem if we can't cite projects. So next slide. The other thing I do when I start in community is I try to figure out or help the community clarify their roles. And this is a big one where I see communities kind of go sideways is they might have some really good ideas, but the wrong people are driving, they're sitting in the wrong seat in the bus. So quickly, I just want to cover where roles are typically sit, what I mean by roles. So for-profit and nonprofit developers are critical partners. It's the only way we get a lot of units in our markets. And they take on the risk, they have an expertise, they get rewarded for taking on those risks. I like to bring in development partners early on in a process to help me do the feasibility work. And so they play a huge role. They also bring in a lot of capacity. So some communities don't have developers that have certain capacities, we bring them in regionally to help. Advocates, if all you did from this call today was become a huge advocate, you have no idea how much power that is. We need everybody game on right now, right? Advocating in all levels of government. Service providers help people stay stably housed. We didn't realize how important this was until the COVID, honestly. And I have shifted most of my work to homeless prevention in the last 2 years because it's too expensive to let people become homeless. But service providers, you're amazing. Thanks for what you do. Funders are also a huge player right now. And of course, we've got state agency funders and local government, but foundations are powerful. So I've been working with health foundations over the last couple of years, and where they're showing up in the space is they're providing pre-development money. Risky, how do you figure out if a deal is going to work? Nobody ever wants to fund it. So it's really powerful to fund pre-development. They fund services. They'll fund loan guarantees. They'll give equity to projects, really powerful stuff. I even have a foundation in Santa Fe who did an option on a motel for us because we didn't have a developer ready to do that. Next slide. Other roles, local government. I think you have the hardest job right now. So if you're in local government, thank you for what you do. What we want to be thinking about with local government is how to help create capacity quickly for you all. All this money's coming in, all these needs. How do you quickly flex to meet some of these needs? We're seeing a lot of communities look at sharing regional positions, sharing regional teams. But obviously you've always had power over land use. You do policies, you can donate land, you can provide resources. You're a critical player. Sponsor can be anybody. A sponsor is someone who's got that fire in the belly. You all know who that person is. Somebody in your community who's can't sleep on the week, just can't sleep because they want to do something about housing. So I've had sponsors, I've had churches, I've had schools, I've had nonprofits, I've had government. But the sponsor says, I'm going to make this happen and I'm going to pull together the team and move it forward. But they don't typically have a long-term ownership interest. Anchor institutions have become a huge thing. I have colleges blackened here from a presentation I did a few weeks ago. Right now I'm working on a potential development with a college in Colorado. I've got a number of church properties that we're putting into play for housing. School districts, right? We've been doing this for a while, but everything's going to scale. And especially, I think with COVID, we are rethinking, right? We're reimagining how we use space. And I think we're going to continue to look for ways to repurpose commercial some of these public spaces for housing and mixed use. Community members and residents, your voices are important. Where things go, citing's a big thing. What kind of amenities these projects have and who they serve, and being involved in that. Next slide. Again, quickly, when I do strategy, it's one of three things. It's going to fall in either preserving, actually, you should do all. You should always try to do all of these things, but one of these maybe have a higher focus in your community than another. So preserving existing housing, right? We can't go backwards. We got to try to hold on to everything we have. Promoting development, as I said, this is the number one thing I'm working on in most communities. And then increasing access to housing opportunity means if somebody's housed, let's stabilize them. We don't want people falling out of housing. We also have BIPOC communities. We have language justice issues where folks, I have a community where there's housing, but folks can't fill out the paperwork because it's in Spanish. Like we need housing navigation services. We need to be thoughtful about making sure people have access to existing resources, no matter who they are. And then we've always got homebuyer education, renters' rights and tenant right programs that help people move through the continuum. Next slide. I'm gonna have to go. How am I doing on time, Michelle? You doing okay? Got about 10 minutes?
Yeah, if we could, I would say 10 minutes max, including some Q&A. So.
Okay, so I may skip some more slides. We've done a couple preservation things in my community lately. We just did our first resident-owned community with a mobile home park, and then we just did a preservation of a senior disabled building this year. Next slide. I'm not going to go over these. These are going to be resources for folks. I'm going to keep going. So let's skip this. And stabilization. So these slides have detailed ideas around how to promote development and how to think about stabilization services, but I'm going to keep going. Again, there are resources for you all later throughout the day. Capacity building, I'm going to talk about this one because, again, I think where communities really struggle is how do you get to the capacity you need to implement some programs. I always say you need to reinforce what you already have. So a lot of times what will happen in communities would come in and there's a great new shiny idea over here and that one over there. And you might have a habitat doing 10 units a year. Make sure that habitat keeps going, right? And right now, we used to fight over the pie. The pie is huge. It's tenfold what it's ever been. So we really just need to work together to increase that capacity. Again, we find ways to work with the private developers all the time because they're really good at development. And when you find the mission-driven partners, you can do a lot more scale. Policy is an important element to all this work. And we have a whole laundry list of different policies that local communities can consider adopting to help either mitigate demand on existing units or create more units at certain price points. Next slide. Private sector, I'm going to spend a second on this. This is the first time in my career where I'm seeing so much interest from the private sector. This is Durango Mountain Resort. I put together a mortgage assistance program for them many, many years ago. Starting conversations this week about some development in what we call North County. But employers have a lot to bring to the table. Sometimes they have real estate. That's always the first thing I say. Do you have a site? Do you have land? Can we co-locate somewhere? If you don't have land, are you willing to fund pre-development on a city-owned parcel? Are you willing to do a mortgage assistance program? Are you willing to fund a housing navigation position so that your employers can have better access to units in our community? Very important right now. Next slide. Public sector, you've been important for a very long time, but the money's flowing through you. So it takes a lot of effort and energy to be thinking about where the money should go. I had a conversation with a commissioner in my community last week, and he said, Jen, if you could come back with 2 strategies, 5 million each, I'd be thrilled, right? And I can't do that, and it won't happen that way, but I recognize it's a lot of burden on local communities. And so my punchline here is pre-development, land pre-development. And I think I'm going to skip right to those slides so I can explain what I mean there. Next slide. This just is an illustration of how much money is happening right now. This is in Colorado, and this is federal and state money. I don't know what's happening in your state, but I hope you do. It's really important you're tracking these resources because there's a lot happening right now. Next slide. All right, here's what I recommend when I do go into community. Oftentimes people will say, well, should we do a strategy or should we do a project? Like, where do we start? You got to do both. The reason I say that is because the money's flowing so quickly, you need to be positioned. If you have the ability to spend $10 million in the next 6 months, you want to know how you would do that. If you all don't create those strategies, I guarantee you someone will, and it's not going to be what you wanted. And if you can get a project going, it's going to get momentum and it's going to give people a lot of excitement and hope. The other thing I hear in communities is we did a needs assessment. It was 5 years ago, nothing happened. We did a strategy, nothing happened. So when I talk about strategy, I'm starting to use the term investment strategy. It is active. It is putting money in play immediately for outcomes. It is not, 300, it's very, very focused. The other thing I tell communities is you can't do everything. Pick the 1 or 2 things that you can do right now and just focus on those things. A couple more slides and we're about done. All right, here's an example. This is why I love pre-development so much. So I can't figure out who will pay for pre-development, and it has incredible leverage. So this past summer, the city of Durango, we've been talking for months about homelessness, and we had a number of motels for sale. I met with a broker, the Best Western, really well located, no neighbors, awesome. But we needed about 100,000 to run a 6-month due diligence process to see, could we acquire this? Who would acquire this? How much will it cost? Blah, 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 blah. So the city invested 100,000 and hired our team to kind of go through that process. We found a national development partner, and we're moving now towards, it's a 70-unit older motel to a redevelopment in addition, and about 120 net new units of housing with rents between $470 and $1,200. And it'll, if we're successful, it'll leverage 30 million. That's why I love pre-development. You don't need a lot of money, but it will leverage significantly. Not every deal that you fund pre-development for will work. Oh yeah, NIMBYism. We'll have to go to that in Q&A. Sorry, I just looked up. All right, I think I just have 2 more slides. Oh, there we go. Sorry. So
I think you have one more slide.
I have one more slide. Let's just go to questions. Let's go to the fun part.
Okay, so questions in the chat. First one, any advice about preventing, basically dealing with NIMBYism, not in my backyard?
So there's multiple things to do. So first and foremost, you want to have a community coalition that will show up at those meetings and have an alternative message. So that's just practical, right? Like we need to be building more coalitions to show up. Practically, if you're going to do a project, if you can find a site that's already zoned, that's what you do. So your community, maybe the question will be, how many either commercial or empty spaces and empty sites in my community could go for multifamily housing or single family housing today? That's an assessment you could do. And if you can't build housing in your community without going through a lengthy public process, start working on that. Again, we want to mitigate the public process from killing these projects because the public process is extremely flawed. Only the people that don't like the project show up, right? So if we can make projects have administrative approvals to move forward, so you don't have to go through all these processes, you're walking in the planning department, you have a couple meetings, and you're pulling, you're able to move forward. That's what you want to do. So how do you get there? I don't know if that was helpful.
All right. Let's bring up the elephant in the room, short-term rentals. Any advice about, folks buying up available inventory and converting to short-term rentals?
I know Crested Butte, Taos, there's a number, and even Durango has a stronger short-term rental policy than they used to, but I would say start looking at policy first. So some communities are limiting the number of licenses they'll give for VRBOs or Airbnbs. I also know, and I apologize, this is not my expertise, but I'm hearing that there's also incentive programs happening where local communities, maybe it's Breckenridge, it's somewhere on the I-70 in the ski resort areas, but they're incentivizing owners to take locals instead of doing Airbnb. So I think, again, in not knowing the politics of any communities, you always want to look at what's the policy that can start to mitigate demand and what's the incentive that will also help open up units, and try to do both.
All right.
And I bet there's other people. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's do 2 more quick questions, and then we'll go into a quick breakout where folks can breathe for a moment while we're shifting gears. So, do you advise acquiring a site before investing in any pre-development work?
I would not. That's a great question. And in fact, in a perfect world, I would have the development partner, if you're not going to be the direct developer, I would have the development partner selected before you select the site, because ultimately they have the most at risk and they'll have the best eye for what we're solving for. But yeah, I would not acquire a site without pre-development due diligence. And again, it can take anywhere from 3 months to 9 months to go through those processes. So yeah.
Last question, have any Colorado communities taken steps to tally the public subsidies required to compensate for outside speculative investment and inflation, price inflation?
That is a heck of a question. I don't know, but I do know that there was a study done in Northwest Colorado, and I can get it to the team, that did measure the impacts of people moving in and the displacement that was happening during COVID. And I think you all know this. We don't have great data today, right? We have census data, which was taken kind of before and during COVID. And so real-time data is a real challenge for a lot of communities right now. But that Northwest study would be the closest thing, I think, to that. So.
Great. Jenn, thank you. Thank you. Do you have one more thing to say?
No, I'm going to stop myself.
Jenn could go on for the entire time, and we would love it. So Jenn, thank you so much for kicking us off. This is fantastic. And if you're not watching the chat, Jenn's slides, all of the slides from this day will be available online after the roundtable. Like not moments after the roundtable, but give us a little time to put them up. So Jenn, thanks again. We really appreciate you getting us going. And now we're great. I see everybody rudely interrupted and coming back into the main room. Thanks, Marcy. Thanks, everybody, for putting up with being Zoom interrupted. Eric Kingston, are you back in the room? Hey, everybody, welcome back. We're going to dive right in. Hope that wasn't too rude of an interruption. We're going to dive in, and Eric Kingston is going to introduce our next speaker. And Bart, if you want to go ahead and share your screen while Eric's introducing you, then we'll dive into your presentation. Eric, where are you, Eric?
That's a big responsibility. So Bart is someone I've known for quite a few years. He's the head guy at Leap Charities, Leap Housing, Property People. He wears a lot of different hats. And I've always found that Leap was one of those groups that's sort of really figuring out what's working, you know, in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, and finding ways to adapt those models to what will work in Idaho and in the Treasure Valley area. So they've got anything from welcome housing that specifically assists the refugee resettlement organizations and the refugees coming into the Boise area find short-term housing. They've got home ownership projects. They've got rental options, and they're working on land trusts, and they're also working on residential communities. So Bart's going to talk about all of that stuff, but he's got a good team over there. And I always enjoy including Bart in these kinds of conversations. So take it away, Bart.
Thanks, Eric. Hey, will you give me a quick nod just to make sure you can hear me okay? My audio is good and you can see the presentation. Thumbs up? Awesome. Okay. Hey, well, good morning, everybody. I am so thankful. I just want to thank you for putting this conference together. I think I saw the list of speakers, super high quality. I'm really impressed at the quality of the conference that's been put together. I, of course, think this topic is critical. I'd argue that housing is, if not one of the most pressing issues of our time. And so I just want to say thank you to Lori, to Michelle, Eric, Marcy, and everybody on the planning team who made this possible and pulled it all together. So I'm really, really excited to participate today as a keynote speaker. I also just don't want to go any further just without expressing my appreciation to all the people that have committed your time today. I know your time is really valuable, and you're here engaged in one more Zoom conference. And you're participating, and that's like the most important and the first major step. So I'm super inspired to see all the engaged citizens, the non-profiteers, the elected officials, community development officers, and so many other of the 200 people who have joined today. So special thanks to you. And just because, presentations are, they are what they are, can we just do a quick visualization exercise as we start here? So I just want to ask that you would participate with me in this. Just humor me, but do the best you possibly can. So get comfortable. You don't necessarily have to close your eyes. I know some people are in conference rooms. It might be a little awkward. Somebody's probably driving, but just get comfortable. And I want you to envision in your mind what a picture of a whole solution to housing looks like in your community. So sort of begin to imagine, maybe it's service, social service oriented housing for the most vulnerable in your community. Maybe it's a workforce housing project. Whatever it is, sort of imagine, kind of get a picture in your head of that right now. Now that you have that picture in your mind, what I want you to do is just break this image into pieces. And I don't mean just like shatter it. What I mean is I want to break it into puzzle pieces. So I want you to imagine there's curves and tabs of those puzzle pieces. And then begin to like let the light kind of come through this image. So you can now see this image of whole housing in your community now as a puzzle. Okay. So now in your mind, you got this kind of set up. I want to suggest two really important things. These are the things we've learned about this image. One, I just want you to see yourself or your organization as one of those puzzle pieces. So I need you to see one of the puzzle pieces and identify yourself as that. Our personal experience has been that people and organizations often see themselves as all of the puzzle pieces or none of the puzzle pieces. So the key takeaway here is that you see yourself, you a participant on this call, as one of those puzzle pieces. And then second, I want you to notice how essential all the pieces are at interlocking and how important each and every single one of those puzzle pieces is to making the image clear and whole. And I want to just encourage that this is the call to collaboration, that you would see the necessity in this image of collaboration as the only way that the vision of whole housing can be accomplished in your community. We have determined that it is impossible to do it with just one puzzle piece. It takes all of that collaboration. And I think that's sometimes some of the biggest barriers to getting it. So now that you've done this exercise, now let me re-engage, and I want to reintroduce myself. So my name is Bart Cochran. I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called Leap Housing in Boise. And I too am one piece of that overall puzzle. So I have been a real estate practitioner, an entrepreneur since I graduated from the University of Idaho in 2003. But in 2016, I found myself surrounded by the aftermath of the Great Recession and simply couldn't watch would-be renters and homeowners fall off the ends of the housing need. I sat in your respective chairs as you do today, asking the same questions. What can we do? What can we do about this issue? So I, along with my business partner and now many partners in our community and throughout the state of Idaho, have decided to fill our role as a piece of that overall puzzle, how we create whole housing solutions in our community. And we've chosen to become a piece of that overall solution. So today I've got the privilege to be able to share our journey a little bit and some of the creative solutions that we're implementing in the hopes that you may find some encouragement or some ideas for your specific community. So with that, I'll just open up the slide presentation. Our organization, again, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're considered a community housing development organization under sort of a HUD definition. 1/3 of our board members are also low-income members of our community. Our mission is to develop and preserve affordable housing while providing empowering services that lead to greater housing stability. Again, as a mission statement, In short, we're a scrappy nonprofit that's working to find creative solutions to solve some of these problems in our community. We would, if you aligned us in two ends of the world, we know there's programmatic organizations and there's what we call inventory focused. We're an inventory focused organization where practitioners, and our goal is to deliver as many solutions to housing challenges as possible in the community. Well, just so you have an idea about our lens, sort of our belief statement is that all people deserve an opportunity to access affordable housing. And so we have tried to do our best to try to sort of draw a diagram. Most of us have all seen what's called the housing continuum. It's usually a straight line. We've designed what we think is a stair-stepping process, and that comes from the realization that all housing is not uniform. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. There is a wide range of housing types for a wide range of housing needs. And so we've designed this just sort of in alignment with the programs that we operate as an organization. We started about the first step. Eric mentioned our transitional housing program, so short-term housing, all the way up to the top step, which we refer to as the crown jewel of poverty alleviation, which is whole ownership. So the idea that a person that falls into, and we're primarily targeting 80% of area median income. I saw in some of your resources, there's some definitions. But when we use the term low income, we're really meaning households at 80% of area median income or less. So that's what we're usually referring to. That's our primary focus as an organization. But when we can help low-income households become homeowners in the market, they get access to all of that equity upside. And so that's what we call whole ownership. So then because those two things are not the solutions for everybody, we've developed some programs in the middle. So those mid steps include partial, but either long-term rental or some sort of a shared equity model, resident ownership through a cooperative development program, or shared equity through a land trust. And I'll talk a little bit about those programs. But the idea is that each of these is a stair step towards the most powerful housing product that is wealth building and equity building, which would be whole ownership of housing in the community. So just a little bit more here, just a little bit more about how we do it. We operate temporary housing as a soft landing. We connect renters to home buying resources. We research affordable housing trends and solutions. We develop and own affordable housing, and we preserve existing affordable housing. So just so you can kind of understand the framework about what we're wrapping our heads around, I'm talking specifically in this case, these are Boise metro area details. That's not, I understand that's not the intent of the audience, but just so you can see some numbers that we think are really important to us. What this does is understanding the data helps us understanding how do we best serve the gaps in the market. So sometimes we got to start with just what do we need to know about the market? So one of the things that gets overlooked a little bit is in most communities, we find that about 1/3 of all households fall into this low income category, 80% of area median income or less. In communities where you're seeing rapid amounts of appreciation, most often you're seeing appreciation of housing move faster than incomes. Specifically over this 4-year period of time, we took Boise, it was 75% house appreciation versus 18% income increases. So you can see that all that does is just spells a larger and larger gap. And then we played with the numbers and said, hey, in this appreciating market, what happened in the last hour? So in this case, we determined that if you were a homeowner, if you had the benefit of being a homeowner, your home just went up $15.64 in the last hour. And that was just roughly twice the minimum wage. Those numbers just begin to tell us a little bit of that story. We love the National Low Income Housing Coalition and some of their data points. If you haven't ever visited their website, they've got tons and tons of resources, but we put together this Idaho statistics. We're thinking about things like what percentage of the population is housing cost burdened. So anytime that a household is spending over 30%, you heard this term in Jennifer's presentation, but in Idaho, it's 38%. 38% of households are spending more than 30% of their income. We care about that because the stability of that household is at risk, and a slide all the way down means homelessness. And so what we want to do is try to create more households that are able to be in a housing situation which they're not spending more than 30%. There's an inventory number. It tells us statewide that approximately 22,000 units of housing are needed in order to meet the need. And then 36,000 households in Idaho are considered extremely low income. So that's 30% of area median income. Jennifer talked about that as being one of the most difficult audiences to serve just because the income, it's tough to make a project work because the income doesn't really support the funds necessary to create that housing. So just to be equitable, I did this same statistic for state of Wyoming and the state of Montana. 22.1% spending more than 30% of household income on housing costs. 7,000 is the total amount of housing need statewide. And there's 19,000 households at extremely low income. Montana, 23.6%. At 30% or greater, 17,000 is the inventory needed. We assume that those numbers are grossly understated, but they're numbers. They're a good starting point. 32,000 is the total number of extremely low-income households. So just we encourage people to start with the data, understand the market and what you're trying to serve, and understand acutely what those needs are. I promise you, at a minimum, the developers and the funders are going to ask those specific questions, and that's going to often be the litmus test about whether funding can be procured for a project going forward. So just a little bit about these programs. Believe it or not, there wasn't a home buying program in Idaho, that provided navigation services. So we found lots and lots of people who would be home buyers who said, hey, I want to be a home buyer, but I don't know how to get there. I've got a barrier. There's something that's standing between here and there. This audience that served in the Yes You Can program is 80% of area median income or less, so low-income households. And so what we found was that there's lots and lots of great resources in our community, but that there wasn't a great connector of those. So most often people have more than one barrier in order to get to home ownership. So what we're doing is helping them link those resources together, and then we're available at the other end of it to help them actually purchase. Today, since 2018, when we piloted the project, we've had over 64 homeowners purchase, and they together have a cumulative net worth of approximately $5 million. So again, this is sort of us proving out this idea that home ownership, if and when it's possible, is a very, very powerful tool for low-income people, for low-income households. A little bit more information, resident ownership. Maybe you've heard a little bit about this. I think Jennifer even mentioned it. In Montana, the affiliate of Rock USA is NeighborWorks Montana. Maybe there's even somebody from that organization on today. LEAP is the affiliate of Rock USA in southern Idaho. And so this community, what we do is we work with manufactured housing communities to convert from investor-owned to resident-owned. So just think about that alignment of I own a home that's on rented land. And the idea here is what we're doing is allowing that homeowner to become a shareholder in a company that owns the land underneath those homes. So giving oftentimes folks who are some of the most vulnerable in our community, low income, but giving them power and decision-making about capital improvements in their community, pride of ownership, and decisions about future rents and stability of that housing project. So we've converted 2 communities thus far in Idaho. So a little bit more information. Affordable housing development, we develop and build affordable housing using a lot of the sort of normal cast of characters, federal funding. A lot of our projects are pretty small and niche, 4 units at a time. What we're finding is from a population perspective, in rural communities across the state, there is sort of an awkwardness between the funding sources. Low-income housing tax credits oftentimes requires a large-scale project, and then there's what we call single family, which is very like 1 to 4 units. A lot of times in these communities, rural communities that we're working with, have a need for something like a dozen units. And so federal funding sort of is a little bit awkward in that space. So we're working on some creative solutions on just how to scale that in a way that you can meet that sort of middle need. Affordable housing, this is a project here. These are converted shipping containers. So working with a social venture called Indie Dwell to convert shipping containers into affordable housing. So this is some of their first housing units out of their factory. And so just an example of just sort of the out of the box concepts of housing that we're just trying to deploy. Like Eric said, we're borrowing these ideas from a lot of other great resources of the community and trying them on in our community to say, does this work? Does this fit? Does this actually materialize into a solution that can be useful? So 17 homes constructed, 21 in development right now, and then we just awarded our first low-income housing tax credit project. The LEAP Housing Trust, this was a big one. The home ownership piece of our organization, Yes You Can, essentially was outstripped by the housing costs. So at some point, when we reached about $275,000 median home price, homes were no longer affordable to households at 80% of very median income. Our median household house price today is a little over $500,000. So it happened some time ago, but we said if the market's not going to deliver housing, home ownership opportunities, we're going to have to work backwards and create it. We're going to have to create housing that's affordable to this audience. And so in home ownership, we studied what we considered down payment assistance. And the thing we couldn't wrap our heads around was this idea that we would take funding and use it to help make a house affordable for one household, but when it's sold, it's no longer affordable. So it would be great and wonderful for that first house, but not useful for every household that comes afterwards. So we looked and looked to find a better solution for home ownership. We came up with the community land trust movement. And so we formed the first LEAP, it's called the LEAP Housing Trust, the first community land trust for home ownership in the Treasure Valley. And essentially what we do is we eliminate land from the equation. So we artificially lower the cost of housing. And then we enter into an agreement, a long-term lease. The land is held by the LEAP Housing Trust long-term. And we enter into a long-term lease so that we agree that you can purchase a home at below market, but you're also going to agree to sell it to another household at 80% of very median income in the future. So that over time, after time, when houses are sold, they stay and remain affordable. We call this perpetual affordability. It's a great program. It's one of the only programs that we're aware of that create perpetual affordable housing opportunities. It's the only one that we're aware of that combines perpetual affordability and also equity creation. So it's a really powerful tool in that sort of stair-stepping process, if you can remember that diagram from the beginning. So here's what it looks like. Some people like to look at a visual of what in the world am I talking about, but you can see households on the left. You can see the LEAP Housing Trust on the right. I guess it's my right. And then there's the house in the middle. And we enter into a 99-year ground lease. And that restricts the sale price in the future. It also does allow them to generate some equity from the sale of the home, but it's not at market. It's governed to a point to ensure that it stays affordable for the future. A little why we like this is because it's when subsidies are utilized, they're utilized over and over and over. So a single subsidy gets used. We think it's a very positive use of funding over time. So just a little bit, just a couple last kind of comments here. We're finding some really interesting strategies on how to, who our partners might be. Healthcare providers seem to be one of our largest funding sources right now. I think hopefully it's a little bit of an encouragement. When we first got into this, we didn't think healthcare providers were going to be play much of a role in housing creation, but they sure are today. We found some really amazing opportunities to work with them. And so, just thinking like, maybe you might rule out certain partners in your community because you think they may not have an interest in housing. Don't rule anybody out. It could be you will find yourself surprised about who's interested in participating. We're working with our first project in Mountain Home will basically take a resident services approach that is talking about how do we keep people stable, but also advance social determinants of health. So it's a beautiful marriage of healthcare providers and housing to find a neat way to collaborate. This is just examples of some of their essentially what they've recommended we do in the design and development of this project and the sort of services we provide. It's all through a healthcare lens. And then just to give you just a sense of community partners, again, a lot of times we're surprised about this. LEAP has become the official nonprofit of the Boise Regional Realtors. So we have a 5-year engagement with realtors to work on both funding housing, but also to help move our mission forward. Of course, foundations, banks have been a really key partner, and then, like I said, healthcare organizations. So this just gives you a little bit of a sample of the kind of cast of characters that end up becoming real critical partners to making this happen. Again, I admit that we're just one puzzle piece. These are the other puzzle pieces that help make this happen, these and many other people. And then this year, our board has approved us to expand our work throughout the state of Idaho. We just got back from our road trip of northern Idaho and central Idaho, visiting Orofino and Rathdrum. And I think Colleen's on here from Kellogg. So we're looking at scoping projects throughout the state and to see if we can help deploy or recycle some of these ideas and see how applicable they are in a rural context. And so we think that if we can borrow these ideas from elsewhere, people can certainly borrow them from us. And so we're working on ways to see about how do we try out some of these programs throughout the state of Idaho. And then just our process. So we have specifically identified a niche that we can fill, and that is that we're a developer. We understand development, construction, capital stacking, how to put the financing together, property management, federal compliance, federal fair housing. Most often, when we work with partners, churches, communities, healthcare systems, those are the things that they say, these are the things we're not. We're not a developer, a property manager, and so on and so forth. So what we're doing is bringing the technical skills to communities and to organizations, and then we're partnering with them to sort of help jointly accomplish the ultimate goal of creating, solving these housing challenges in the community, each one being different. And we just have highlighted where communities can really be impactful in this process. And that is assuming you're working with an organization like ours, a nonprofit developer or a developer, but identifying parcels of land, identifying the local funding sources that could be a part of the overall capital stack, and then helping with that sort of political goodwill of helping us get through the entitlement project and overcoming any challenges we might come with NIMBYism, for example. So that just gives you an idea of really complementary ways that communities and individuals and concerned citizens can work alongside organizations that have those sort of technical skills to be able to build and develop the housing. And I think that's everything that I've got. I just in conclusion, I guess I just want to re-engage with that original vision, right? That vision of whole housing in your community. And I'm optimistic that today you're going to be able to pull a tool from a toolbox. You're going to find a new community partner that you can work with, or maybe you've just got the resources now to go back to your community and convene the stakeholders. And so we just want you to know we're cheering you on. We had a beginning point, a starting point, and we didn't know what we didn't know at the time. And so other organizations doing this work were so impactful in helping us get the ball rolling and get things started. And so I just want you to know we're cheering you on. And if just like even one person goes back to their community and starts something off that's catalytic, that creates housing in your community, I consider this a great success. So I just want to just say, let's build this housing future together. And I just want to thank you so much for your time today.
All right. Bart, thank you. Let's just do a few quick questions before we dive into the breakout room. So one question in the chat was, who pays property taxes in a land trust?
That's a great question. This is sort of something we're still working out, but in a land trust concept, we separate the building from the land itself. So the homeowner pays essentially the equivalent of property taxes on the dwelling itself. So there's two tax bills that comes out, one for the land and one for the house. The resident ends up paying taxes on specifically the house structure. The land trust is responsible for any taxes that might be assessed on the land portion.
Great. Have you tried to use a ground lease with a condominium project or unit, or explored the use of deed restrictions?
Yeah, we would consider the land trust concept as a deed restriction itself, the ground lease, and there's usually a few other federal covenants that are related to the funding sources that are in these projects. So almost everything we do is deed restricted already. No, we haven't done a condo version, but it's something we're very interested in. No, we haven't done the condo version of that, but we believe that there are these sort of relative equivalents to the individual ground lease deed restrictions on like a single lot and house.
Right. Okay, do you find that people graduate out of the land trust units? Do they create adequate equity to buy into market rate units? How do you see that playing out?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's a working theory. I'm sure our partners at Grounded Solutions would be able to give you better, like more articulate information about the whole. But from our perspective, we think we're leaving enough on the table. The idea that you could participate in the market, that if your financial circumstances change that would allow you to exit, we believe that people will find their way out of the land trust and into the market. However, if you look at let's just use just quick stats, $270,000 is the sort of what's affordable to 80% right now in our like in the Treasure Valley, let's say. And then if our median home price is now all of a sudden over $500,000, it's a huge gap to overcome. So that's a significant change in financial circumstances in order to do that. Not all communities are going to look like that though. Some communities, this is going to be the right first step to get folks stabilized, to allow them to create some additional income earning opportunities. And they're going to be ripe for that jump into sort of whole ownership. But in some communities, there's such a, like these projects we're just finishing right now, our first land trust homes, they have $125,000 of subsidy in them. So it's we're really having to bring the cost down in order to make it affordable to the households that really need this housing. So it probably is all just dependent upon the gap between what's affordable to 80% and what your market is producing. So if it's modest, I think there's a real great opportunity to see that jump. If not, I think it's a pretty big, it's going to have to be a pretty big change in income.
Great. All right, one last question that's a complete left turn from this, and then I'm just going to encourage folks who are interested in learning more and sharing ideas about community land trust and alternative ownership to check out that breakout room. Bart's not going to be with us this afternoon, but Matt Fast is going to be with us. And I think you and Matt have worked together. So, but here's the left field question. For the construction puzzle piece, prefabrication is increasingly attractive. What companies, in your opinion, are providing the best prices and products? Any experience there?
I think it's a great question. And I've just put the precursor that there's a lot of conversations about how do you recruit the appropriate skill sets to be able to deliver housing in rural communities across the state, because sometimes not all the sort of the full construction industry is developed in each and every community. And so prefabricated has really opened a significant number of opportunities to be able to factory build housing and then deliver. Our experience is working with a company called IndieDwell, and they had a factory in Caldwell, Idaho. They've since closed that, but are opening other factories, one in Colorado, and then one's already operating in Colorado, and then maybe another one in Virginia. That the value of factory building and then being able to deliver to site was significant. Pricing is, I think, it's a wild card. So that's what I think we're waiting to find out, is how that settles out. The market is just in a significant amount of flux in terms of costs. And so we're seeing the cost of stick building, so site building a project and fabricating, in a factory, building in a factory, we'll see them sort of tip back and forth. So we see huge value in factory building in urban areas, especially the coastal cities. But we're seeing throughout the rest of the country, we're seeing them sort of neck and neck. And depending upon how you look at the values, whether it's time, the ability to build indoors and not have weather issues, it really changes which one's more cost effective. So I wouldn't say that there's probably one that's doing better than the others, because you end up with two definitions: HUD, what's called HUD code housing, so that's manufactured housing, and then what's called prefabricated housing, modular housing, and they build to just slightly different standards, and there tends to be quite a bit of a difference. So the normal cast of characters in HUD code, housing is like Champion, or organization, Gurdon, organizations that you may be pretty familiar with there. And then we're seeing a lot of new prefabricated organizations come into the market. One of the ones I'm just going to give them a plug because I'm fascinated with their model. A group called Zip Kits has been really fascinating, and they actually build the concept in their factory and then they ship it to site and then you assemble it there. So there's a lot of variations coming out. I'd encourage anybody to do the research. What we found was one of the biggest determining factors in terms of cost was shipping. So when you do your search about who might be what might be a modular solution for me, look at geography to think about how difficult will it be to get from the factory location to my location will be a large determining factor, because those shipping costs can really make or break the project.
Bart, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay.
Again, Bart, just like Jen, could go with us all day. We should just have 3-hour Bart seminar for our next meeting, right? And 3-hour Jen seminar for the meeting afterwards. Thank you, Bart. We really appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. We really appreciate the work that we're doing. Marcy's going to break us up into breakout rooms, because I think at this point, okay, I have variously 1014 or 1114, depending on where you are in the world. So we're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and put this question in the chat. If you had to focus on one housing need to address in your community, what would that be? And feel free to put your answers into the chat. I think this is a good way to kind of catch up with how we're thinking about what's important about housing. So we are diving into the second, what I think of as the second part of our roundtable today, which is hearing from people in communities in our 3 states who are doing interesting things with housing. And our first, so each of these is just going to be a quick 5-minute presentation. We're going to do 3 of them. We'll break out into our small groups again, and we'll come back and we'll do 4 more solution stories before we go into our topical breakout rooms, where you get to choose where you go, not just be assigned where you go. So our first presenter today is Robin Adams. And Robin, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, that's perfect. Robin is with the Red Lodge Area Community Foundation in Red Lodge, Montana, and she's going to be talking about owner-built housing. Robin, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So yeah, we're with the Red Lodge Area Community Foundation, and just so you have an idea of, where in the world we are. Red Lodge is the county seat of Carbon County in south central Montana. This nice picture was taken last fall. So we're a resort ski town of about 2,500, and similar to a lot of other people that we've heard today are facing a pretty severe housing crisis, especially for our workforce. So the reason why we're doing something about housing right now, this just gives an idea of a picture from 2020, what an affordable purchase price would be for somebody making average local wages would be about $277,000. And in 2020, the actual purchase price was closer to $400,000. And so that affordability gap is leaving more renters in the renter pool who want to become home buyers. And what we are doing about that is offering an alternative pathway to become a homeowner and have a shared equity model and get a step closer to building equity instead of losing it all to rent each month. So this is our solution. It's called Owner-Built Housing, and it's born of partnerships with Helena Area Habitat for Humanity, Trust Montana, and USDA Rural Development, along with some other organizations that I'll get into in the next slide. But basically, we qualify applicants ahead of time, and they spend a year learning how to build their own home. Habitat teaches them everything they need to know, so they don't need to have any previous construction experience before this. I love this picture. You can see the ski mountain in the background. So these are close to town, within city limits, connected to city infrastructure. 65% of the labor is done by volunteers, so done by the future owners and volunteers that they recruit. We also have really great partnerships with AmeriCorps, and CCC members have come out. The local high school, they have a class, workplace construction experience, that's been partnering with Habitat and coming out and, you know, getting some real world trade skills and working on these homes. And we are not the only ones involved with this. So I like what Bart said about, you know, there's plenty you can do for housing without being, you know, you don't need to be the experienced developer to get things started. So we're kind of the local arm, and we've helped connect Helena Area Habitat, Trust Montana. USDA Rural Development is the lender, and they have a grant with Habitat to run the mutual self-help program in Red Lodge as well. And then on the right, we've got some major funders and financiers that, you know, without them, the project really wouldn't be possible. And Beartooth Electric has helped a lot with making sure that the homes can have solar systems on top of them, and bring those energy costs down for the homeowners as well. And I might need to skip through because it's so easy to talk about this and go over my 5-minute mark. But basically, this is for people that are in that 80% or less area median income. We're included in the Billings Metro. So for us, those income limits are pretty high and kind of hit that workforce mark. They need to commit to the sweat equity requirements and demonstrate that they're financially capable of taking on a mortgage, and they need to qualify with that, you know, stable income, minimal debt, and positive credit. We do use the community land trust model. So we're one of the only, maybe the only program in the state that I know of that blends the sweat equity with Habitat with the shared equity model with the community land trust. And so that's where Trust Montana and Helena Habitat have come in. I really like this graphic, basically. So the homeowners own the improvements on the land, the actual building, and Trust Montana owns the land beneath the homes. And so that makes it more affordable up front for the homeowners because they're not paying for the cost of land. And then the initial subsidy stays with the land in perpetuity. So these homes are going to be affordable for our locals for, you know, a 75-year renewable lease. And I'll maybe skip through this part. But, you know, it took us a while to get to this point, and conducting housing needs assessment and gathering. We have a really dedicated committee of lenders and realtors and local stakeholders that have helped shape the goals to get us to where we are now. And we're on track by 2023 to build 15 homes that will be permanently affordable for locals in Carbon County. And yeah, just main takeaway for me here that, you know, other people may be able to learn from is you can leverage partnerships to get things done. Find partners that have a similar mission to you, and find ways to get creative and make it work, because you really don't have to do everything by yourself. Thank you.
Robin, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Robin's going to join us in the breakout room this afternoon that's focused on owner-built housing. So if you've got questions for Robin, pop into that breakout room. Thank you again. Our next presenter is Michelle Gronevelt, who is with Community and Economic Development in McCall, Idaho. Go for it, Michelle.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's exciting to see so many people participating across 3 states. So That's really great. So this morning, I'm talking a little bit about our local housing incentive program. And just to give you some context, for those of you that don't know, McCall, Idaho is 100 miles north of Boise. And so we're the big city in the area, the big city of 3,000 people, but we can go up to 20,000 on the weekends. Very much a mountain town community with a lot of outdoor recreation. So just to give you, let me just start my slides here. Just to give you a sense of where we're at with our housing program. First of all, when we kicked off our comprehensive plan, we rolled in a housing strategy. We knew it was a huge issue, and our community was kind of going through planning fatigue. So we did outreach for both our comp plan and our needs assessment and strategy. And as you can imagine, housing was our #1 issue in our community. So from that was adopted in 2018. At the staff level, we got together and created basically 6 major initiatives that we wanted to work on right away. And so the first one being the incentive program, which I'm going to dig into a little bit. We also talked about land banking and created a program and a funding source. We looked at city-owned lands and put out some RFPs. We looked at our codes, so regulatory incentives as well as requirements. We considered annexation as a way to get housing. And then obviously we wanted to address some of our seasonal workforce and trying to create provisions to create seasonal housing opportunities. So right now we are in the process of creating an action plan because we did kind of start all of those 6 initiatives and they're in process. And so we kind of wanted to figure out with the whole community, what's next? What are we really going to do to address housing? So when we kicked off our housing program, we used to call it community housing. We decided to rebrand it to local housing. It was a very sort of positive thing to be a local in McCall. And so we moved away from all kind of the income qualifications and just said, hey, we want locals to be able to work and live in the same place. And we also wanted to kick off with the incentive program. We wanted to start off with the incentive rather than a regulatory kind of program. We used to have inclusionary housing and community housing fees, like our county and other places in Idaho were no longer allowed to do that. So we said, let's start with an incentive. Who can disagree with that? So basically our incentive program, it's a deed restriction program. It's available for rental or ownership properties. And basically those who can qualify for it are people who work for McCall area employers. And our council decided to establish an area broader than the city and even our impact area. So it actually goes a little broader. If you work for a McCall area based employer, you're eligible. You can also be a senior or a person with disabilities. So it's basically a program that we work with the private sector on. The owner or the developer sets the base rate. In the deed restriction, we do have appreciation caps. So it's 3% tied to CPI. And then we have a process for doing annual audits as well as random audits to make sure there's compliance with the program. So we have a number of partners that we work with in this program, obviously developers and property owners, contractors. We worked with our local real estate community. We're working with housing nonprofits. We currently don't have a housing authority, but there's conversations about potentially establishing one. Obviously, the local government is a partner in all of this. We work with local employers. We're working with title companies, especially because this is new to them, and also lending institutions. So the way that we're paying for this program is we give $10,000 per deed restricted unit. So it's a reimbursement program. The way we were able to establish our funding source is through our local option tax. So we have essentially a bed tax because we're a resort community in Idaho under 10,000 people. So we tax hotels, motels, short-term rentals, and then we're able to apply for that funding through an annual application process. And then use those funds to help fund this program. So we're currently actually evaluating this program. So we're trying to figure out, we've been working with this program for a couple of years, so we kind of now know what's working, what's not working, and what needs to be changed. We're also looking at potentially tearing off some other incentive programs that could be slightly different, kind of based on our experience with this program. We know that our deed restriction document needs improvement, but we wanted to get this in place, so we kind of started with something relatively simple. We're also now, because we have 14 deed restricted units, we have, I think, another 15 entitled, and then a few more in the process. We're now getting enough units that we're asking the question, who's actually going to administer this program? And so, which is a great problem to have. Hopefully we have enough units that it actually, that becomes an issue. And then we're also running into the issue of how do we keep this program fully funded? So if we get larger projects, you know, the $100,000 to $200,000 we're asking for annually from local option tax may not be enough to fund this program, but we know that we need to fully fund it. We also know that the incentive program is not the silver bullet, but it is one of the tools that we have in play to hopefully address some of our housing needs. So the overall community benefit, I mean, really what we're doing is we're establishing units in perpetuity that are either rental or for sale units that are available for our local workforce or our seniors. We also think that, you know, $10,000 seems like a lot, but, you know, I think compared to a lot of other programs, it's a relatively low cost, especially over time. We're also able to have these projects be privately constructed and managed. And then another piece that's important for our community is that these units can be integrated throughout the whole community. So lessons learned for other communities, I would say, really look at your deed restrictions. If you're looking at creating a program like this, try to establish what are your goals, who's going to manage it, are they enforceable? And then also making sure that you have sustainable funding sources and that the program is really tailored to your local conditions. And I guess my overall takeaway from it is it's good to just do it. Just start with something. That's kind of what we did is we went to our council and we said, we know that this isn't going to be perfect. We're not even sure if $10,000 is the right amount, but let's go ahead and implement, and then we can go back and we can evaluate and change it. So that's really where we're at. We have a couple of years working with this program, and now we're in the evaluation process, and we're kind of excited to see what comes out of it.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. We really appreciate you sharing that with us today. Our next presenter is Mike Scholl with Ayers Associates. He co-locates between Fort Collins, Colorado and Cheyenne, Wyoming. And take it away, Mike. And you're muted.
Sorry about that. So my name is Mike Scholl. I'm with Ayers Associates, and thank you. I will say, I think that Michelle and the other project from Red Lodge are really awesome things people are doing. I want to kind of build on that a little bit and kind of talk to communities about how you think like a developer, or encourage folks to think like developers, because in a lot of communities, particularly in rural communities, you know, if you don't have the luxury of being in a higher end mountain town where housing is, you know, where there's a market, you know, a market exists for housing, you know, you really have a challenge with supply issues. I mean, how do you even build housing sometimes? You know, if you don't, we work in some communities in Colorado's Front Range or Eastern Plain, where the nearest architect is 90 minutes away. And there's no general contractor within 2 hours. So, you know, how do you address a housing problem if you don't have, you know, if you can't even access an architect or a general contractor? And how can you even possibly think about attracting a developer, a private developer, to come into your town, you know, when your conditions are you have some challenging conditions? And I think sometimes that compels people to think, or communities to start to have to think like a developer, be their own developer, and not kind of worry about or not always rely on having somebody come in, a developer come in and kind of save everything, because for a lot of communities it's just not possible. We work with communities all the time to kind of help them understand how they can start to take that position themselves to think more like a developer and really take charge of the real estate in their community. And this is an example where we're helping the Laramie Main Street Alliance do that. This is a building that they own. It was granted to them due to a fire. They were able to acquire. They were able to build a grocery co-op, which is also another great model for rural communities with some food issues, with the grant through the Wyoming Business Council, but they were unable to finish the third floor just because of budget issues, and that it stayed vacant for 3 years. And so we actually went in and had a conversation with them. They were asked us about how they could get it activated. They were looking at trying to attract a developer, but really in this instance, it was in their best interest to be their own developer, to go out and do the financing and do the construction themselves, so that they could benefit as an organization, while simultaneously providing increasing the supply of housing in their downtown, which is badly needed. This is just the layout from the permit set of the 3 units that we're building. We're going to close on financing in a couple weeks. Like I said, the initial funding was provided by the Wyoming Business Council. We're looking at financing through a local bank. They were able to get some pre-development funding to LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, but also the USDA and other organizations, particularly communities under 20,000, provide funding for pre-development to help organizations do that. They're acting as their own developer. They're financing the project, based on projected income from the units. It's 3,600 total square feet, 3 units of about 1,200 a piece. And when the good thing about it, from a sustainability perspective as an organization, they'll receive somewhere between 15 and 20,000 a year in residual income, plus the building equity, from this project. This is a sheet from an Excel spreadsheet on a real estate pro forma that I put together. I do have these.
Hey, Mike, your slides aren't advancing on our screen.
Oh, they're not?
So we're still on your title slide for some reason.
That's not good. Let me try that one more time, see if I can do it.
And just so everybody knows, Mike's slides will be available along with everybody else's after, but it would be probably helpful to be able to see them now. There we go.
Is this the right one then?
That's the why we did, and then who benefited.
Okay. Sorry about that.
There you go.
The fun part of doing virtual presentations. So thank you for pointing that out. So this is as I was saying that we help them put together kind of real estate a pro forma development plan, found the team members and helped them act as their own developer. I do have, just that I give away to communities, I have a formatted spreadsheet for folks that they can plug in numbers to look at project costs and do kind of your own real estate analysis, and say, become your own expert first before you pay to bring somebody like me in, and understand your housing market in your community and start to plug in numbers, because, I always say development is like a path of least resistance. Development's like water, it follows the path of least resistance. And we always think about developers, and developers are going to go to the communities where they get the highest returns. And if you're not one of those communities, the developers aren't necessarily going to come. You have to kind of think about being your own developer and understand what the market, what the economics are in your downtown, not just at a kind of macro level, but also at a project level, and understand how you can invest limited public resources to kind of increase units. And so sometimes I think it's not, you can do everything you want with fees and with, reducing costs, but you still may not get a developer, and you may have to kind of take on that role yourself. So if there anyone's interested, we do have I do provide kind of a do-it-yourself real estate pro forma for people to play around with. And I think, one of the lessons that we've learned, particularly working in smaller communities, is that, it's really up to you to take charge of that real estate. Developers aren't going to show up in a lot of cases. And, sometimes you really need to think of, bootstrap, more of a bootstrap approach. And I compare it to the old-fashioned barn raising. A lot of in rural communities, people come together to build a barn, and I think today with the current housing crisis that we're having, I think around the country, it's important that communities really kind of take charge of that and think about how they can build it themselves. When the absence of any kind of developer, or other investor. So anyway, I am sorry about the snafu, but that's my presentation. The Laramie, the Main Street Alliance, we are actually finishing. They're acting as their own developer, as I mentioned. We're closing on financing in the next 2 weeks. We're going to start construction in February, and they're going to deliver the units in late summer or fall of this year. And that they will be the owner and operator, and will receive the benefit, the income, and the equity. So for them, it's a very lucrative proposition. It helps them continue their mission going forward, as well as providing kind of a much needed housing into their downtown and their community. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike. Hey, Mike, since we didn't really get a chance to see it, will you just share your screen again and go back to the layout of the 3 units? I think that's just a good visual to see what they're doing on the 3rd floor of that building. This is how they're laying out these 3 units in this building, and then that's going to kick off revenue for the Main Street Alliance.
Yeah, there's 3. It's 3. Actually, the first one is technically a 1-bedroom for fire code purposes. So but the other 2 are 2-bedroom units. And I think they had the property available to them, and had been vacant, which I think is a real tragedy. Particularly in upper story buildings and downtowns where you have a demand for housing, but a lot of the vacant spaces. And so, being able to kind of work, take charge of it and figure out how to do the development yourself, is really important, especially, in smaller communities where 3, 4, 5 units can really make a big difference. Being able to take advantage to get these spaces activated, I think is a really cool thing.
Great, thanks, Mike. Mike, we really appreciate you sharing the story with us. And speaking of reclaiming historic buildings, our next presenter is Julie Steitler with Homeward in Missoula, Montana. And Julie, take it away.
The whole sharing screen thing always makes me a little nervous. Can you see the presentation?
You did great.
Okay. One hurdle expanded upon. So we're going to talk mostly about Blue Bunch Flats, but Homeward has done several adaptive reuse projects in Montana. We work in towns all over Montana. And on Blue Bunch Flats, which is in Livingston, Montana, and it's really hard to say, right, Blue Bunch Flats. The key partner was the HRDC out of Bozeman and Livingston, the local district HRDC. Okay, this is not working. My slides are also not advancing.
Going around.
Okay, there we go. So project overview, we had lots of funding partners. This project used low-income housing tax credits as the primary source of funding, but we also had federal and state historic tax credits. And in the end, we had an ARPA grant because the project was significantly impacted by the COVID-19 global pandemic. We also have home funds. We have a couple of foundation grants from the Steel Reese and Wells Fargo Foundation. And we had an AHP grant from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines. Plus, the city of Livingston chipped in with some permit fee waivers, which really helped. As I said, it was the former Livingston Memorial Hospital. Originally, it was built in 1955 and had some significant remodeling and additions done in the late 80s. It was an okay, I said good, but it was an okay example of mid-century modern architecture, which is just now becoming eligible for listing on the on the National Register of Historic Places, and is a critical step in getting those historic tax credits. And you don't want to overlook that. I mean, that the benefit of doing adaptive reuse is you've got an existing building, it's got existing infrastructure, and if it's eligible for historic listing, you want to explore that because it can provide, you know, potentially 20 to 25% of the funding needed to do the project. It's a one-story building and it's a typical hospital layout with a central corridor, or in this case, 5 central corridors, and patient rooms on either side, which is a great model to start from if you're doing a housing, because of course you've got a central corridor and then you can have homes on either side of the corridor. Other types of buildings that would be good for this kind of adaptive reuse are schools, sometimes office buildings, often any kind of hotel, a historic hotel. We've done a couple of those. And the benefit in Montana and in our northwestern states is your central corridor keeps your residents warmer, plus their exterior doors aren't going outside. So it's an energy savings as well for the residents, as well as for the property itself. Livingston is like a resort community. I mean, it's not as bad as a lot of those ski communities in Colorado, but it's very close to the Yellowstone National Park. It's got a lot of resorts and destination kind of venues around town. So it has a real need for workforce, rental homes, homes for people who are working in the service industry. And as we have seen across Montana, and I'm sure in a lot of your communities, the long-term rental housing stock has been significantly reduced by people realizing they can earn a lot more money by turning that into an Airbnb or a VRBO. And Livingston has no regulation on that. A lot of these smaller rural communities don't, and they're feeling those impacts very significantly. Why we did it? Well, Homeward's mission is to use sustainable methods to strengthen Montana communities by teaching homebuyer education and financial skill building and creating safe, healthy homes people can afford. We were also approached by the Livingston community because this hospital had been vacant for a few years and it was, you know, a kind of an attractive nuisance. The homes themselves are targeted towards people who are earning about $15 an hour or less. So at the time that we started this, that was pretty much restaurant workers, TA, teaching assistant, new teachers, some first responders. But the project doesn't have rental subsidies, so the residents do have to have some kind of income. Here's a picture of the corner window that we restored and what it looked like before with the T111. Our partners, the HRDC, as I mentioned, the great thing about having a local partner, we're located in Missoula. HRDC is in Bozeman and Livingston. So if there was a critical issue that needed someone there right away, they were there. One of the things that we experienced was a lack of temporary housing for the workers. And because Livingston is a small community, there just aren't enough subcontractors to do this size of project locally. So the HRDC really helped us out with that. We had another building on site that we used for temporary housing, saved a ton of money. US Bank Community Development Corporation purchased the tax credits. The Montana Department of Commerce provided the LIHTC home and ARPA awards, the foundations, the city of Livingston, as we mentioned. The Park County Housing Coalition got the word out when the rentals were available. The State Historic Preservation helped us get the building nominated and listed, and helped us with the parts 1 and 2 forms for the tax credits. DEQ and the EPA provided assessment funds, NeighborWorks money. I mean, you can see by looking at these slides, I'm not going to read these all off because then you'd be seriously bored, but you can see this is what it takes to make a project happen. You have to involve everybody to make it work. The total development cost was about $9.1 million. That includes the land cost, which was significantly higher than we would normally pay, but it is an entire city block. The total construction cost was $5.4 million, but as I mentioned, it's 40,000 square feet. Even though it's a one-story building, it's big. And we pulled out all the stops. We literally, I mean, one of the foundation grants was $30,000. You might look at those totals and say, $30,000, why did you even bother? It makes a difference. Every little penny counts. The project is sustained through rental income, of course. One of the other things we try to do is use simple systems and durable materials so that your operations and maintenance costs can be manageable. We also have a great product that Glacier Bancorp provides, in this case through First Security Bank, which is the 35-year amortization with a 15-year term. So your monthly mortgage payments are significantly lower. We have reasonable property management fees, which is tough to do in our states because you don't necessarily have a lot of resources for property management. And then those durable materials and also energy upgrades to the building envelope help reduce energy costs. So that's another benefit. Overall community benefit, we now have 37 homes, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms that people can afford to rent that are earning, $15 an hour, around there, depending on the size of household, of course. As the household size goes up, the income limit goes up. We've gotten rid of a vacant building that was attracting, people up to no good, you know how that goes. And we preserved a part of the community history. And the site, as I mentioned, it's one city block. Most of the site is open space. So that neighborhood could have had somebody come in and build 2- and 3-story apartment buildings and basically eat up the entire site. And you lose that kind of open space. It's something people get used to. It's hard for them to give that up. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, talking about lessons learned. We've probably been saying things like that to ourselves for the last 2 years, but you just have to be flexible and be able to pivot, change your mind, do something different. Even before the pandemic came in, our initial costs on the first bid were like 100% over budget. So we went back. What can we do? We worked with a contractor. We determined what we could do to reduce costs. You have to be flexible. And then building in buffers, I think, is critical in your budget. You need to keep a healthy contingency. If you can't afford to fund the contingency, then you need to rethink the project, because those things will happen. Those additional costs that you're not wanting to expect, they are going to happen. So if you can't fund it before you start, you won't be able to fund them when they happen. When you're working with old buildings, even if they're only 20 or 30 years old, you have to expect some weird environmental issues are going to pop up. If it's not lead-based paint and asbestos-containing materials, it's going to be mold and mildew. There will be something that you need to remediate in that building. Working with partners you trust, managing the community expectations and your partner's expectations, it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be things that go wrong. And you just have to make everybody realize that this is not going to answer all the problems in the community. This is going to be one project. it's going to provide a community benefit. But one project, as we all know from what we've heard today, one project is not going to solve all the problems. And
Julie, I got to cut you off. Do you have
okay.
one last sentence?
Well, I was just going to say, definitely don't work overtime to preserve something that's not really the best part of what you're doing. When you're doing adaptive reuse, be willing to let go of things. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Really appreciate it. Probably you've all noticed that we're not doing our breakout room in between the solution stories. We're just going to dive right in, and Jed's going to be up next. I'm going to ask our next three speakers. I'm going to give you a little verbal cue at about 4 minutes so we can get on schedule. These are such great stories and great advice that it's a little hard to cut you off. So Jed Neville from the town of Lovell.
How's it going?
You're up.
Good to go. Let's see if I can get this pull up here. I'm not doing the, what do you call it? All right, is that pulling up well?
Yeah.
Rolling, good to go. So what Lovell did is we had a partnership with what was Community Builders out of Colorado, the Wyoming Business Council, and Cascadia Partners. We did a zoning code study, and it's pretty much a code audit for building and development in Lovell. The reason we did that is because our code was very outdated, very stagnant. We have very good developers that live within Lovell, but have yet to build a house within Lovell. So it kind of started the conversation with them. Why aren't you building here? And a lot of it came down to our code and our standards, which includes setback and lot sizes. Definitely won't bore you guys with that, but the opportunity came up. We went to a training in Lander, Wyoming that was hosted by the Community Builders, and our zoning code and housing and development was kind of what we put at our top priority of where we needed to work on. And then the Wyoming Business Council reached out to us sometime later with a cost sharing opportunity to do this code study. So we went forward with it, and it's been very beneficial. It's a very comprehensive study. As you can see, I think it's 68 pages. It has recommendations that are specific to the town of Lovell, little oversight of in our town. It's got a good description here of what middle housing is and kind of what we're missing out on. So just to kind of touch on that a little bit. I already mentioned that we paid through it through a grant, but the project was well received right off the get-go. We had a lot of good participation with our citizens and comments, but where we kind of I think, Lander's probably going to regurgitate this a bit, but we got a little bit of pushback once we started trying to everyone just thought it was going to be a mass code overhaul. We got comments that it's going to change the value of their lot depending on how it's zoned and standards of zoning. So we had a slight pushback there. So kind of what Lovell decided to do with this zoning code audit is we're using it as like a comprehensive reference guide. So when we run into issues or if we have questions, we fall back on this document and we look at where recommendations were. We have those discussions with our citizens, and that's kind of been very helpful. So we haven't done just a big blanket overhaul of our code, but it allows us to open the eyes of our planning and zoning board, our board of adjustments and all that. So I think I think the citizens benefited from this zoning code audit because we actually had lots within Lovell that you could not build on due to our setbacks. Also due to zoning, they couldn't build what they could afford or want because of our zoning. So Community Builders was very, very helpful in coming in and kind of pinpointing those problems. And as you can see here in these first recommendations, like the clarity of our code is all over the place. So that's where we're still working on with legal counsel is getting our code cleaned up, more user friendly for citizens and developers alike. Since this kind of changed, oh, 4 minutes, got it.
1 minute, yeah, 1 minute left.
All right, so yeah, since that kind of opened everyone's eyes, it's allowed that change to be pushed forward pretty well. If there's any lessons learned from this, I can't stress enough that get civic participation as much as possible. I know that's easier said than done. We all face that. But the more people you have from your community involved in these decisions, the easier it is to move forward with. And then I think also, kind of focus on some of these newer generational expectations, because I have a feeling we're going to start seeing a lot of changes in what's acceptable and what's not here in the near future. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Jed. That's all you got time for. That's awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you for sharing that. And Missy White from Lander, Wyoming is going to talk about their experience with the code audit. So have at it, Missy. You are muted.
Thanks for working on making sure I can share my screen. And Michelle, I'm sorry, since this is a different computer, I might need you to do the slides for me.
I will work on it. I got them right here.
Okay.
And you can just
great.
tell me when I need to skip through something.
Okay, thank you. And I do have a timer going, so I can let myself know. So good morning,
Great.
everyone. My name is Missy White. I'm here representing the city of Lander. We're not a resort location, but we are a desirable area, especially for those who like outdoor activities. We're at the foothills of Wind River Mountains. And so likewise with Lovell, we participated in that workshop, and collectively around the state, housing was indeed an issue for us. So Michelle, if you could jump to, thank you, to that slide. So these were some of the findings across the board. There's a shortage of actual housing, a shortage of affordable housing, and there were a variety of housing style options that were desired. You could go to the next one. So, and let's skip through that one. That's a repeat of what's been said. And likewise with Lovell, one of the main reasons that was preventing incentivization, encouragement of different housing styles was largely because of the code. So Lander was selected as a medium-sized town. We're 7,500 people here. Next slide, please. And so we likewise hired community builders, and Cascadia also entered into it. We did some community engagement, first with an online survey, then we had in-person participatory workshops. And from those again confirmed some of the concerns that we had about this, that we're short of homes. There's a high number of residents who are paying over the 30+% of their income for housing, and there is interest for more styles. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of Lander, and in this we only did R2, which is 1 and 2 family homes, R3, the yellow, which can be up to quadplexes, R5, which can be multifamily homes up to, I think, a 12, and then our commercial district in blue. And you can go ahead and gloss over the next slide, Michelle. Yeah, just skip that one. So let's dive into the opportunities, because that's the biggest part. And I've got some individual examples of most of these. So these were some of the major opportunities and suggested changes to our code that came about. Decreasing the minimum lot sizes, increasing the amount of available lot coverage. We had that fairly small. In some areas, it's no more than 50% of your lot. Decrease the off-street parking requirements, allow ADUs to be there. Likewise with Lovell, changing our setbacks. Also allowing pocket neighborhoods or cottage clusters to be developed. And another one was form-based standards. Next slide. Yeah, so here's an example of how decreased minimum lot size is beneficial. On the left, what we require per unit was a certain amount of lot, which on the left would require 5 city lots. We could change that and require far fewer, down to 2 lots and make much more land available and decrease the building. We typically have required very firm off-street parking requirements instead of allowing entities, especially in multifamily homes, to use their on-street adjacent parking as part of that. And so these were some of their suggestions for that and how it would, again, change the ability to develop more housing. Next one, please. Being able to incorporate additional dwelling units was another suggestion. And we actually have these throughout Lander. They're scattered throughout, but to make them more formally available was an option. And they provide all kinds of benefits, as you can see listed there. Tremendous benefits for that. They can look a lot of different ways, from basement conversions, a converted garage. It could be a detached building on your lot or an attached ADU. To your home. A key thing about ADUs is they can't be sold separately. They would both be sold in any property transfer. Next one, please. Pocket neighborhoods or cottage clusters was another option, and the individual homes are actually held by the owner and can be sold at their will, but they do abound a shared community space that is operated among the individual owners of that land. And they suggested some form-based standards from building height and other things. And these again were because some of what we consider the quintessential Lander homes could not be rebuilt on today's standards. So next one, please. And folks are also very curious about the design itself. No one wants to live on Garage Lane. And these are some of the things that can help maintain a neighborhood feel. The last one, if you're game, Michelle, were some of the things we learned that were some of the challenges in working with the public. Folks want to think the street belongs to them. It doesn't. Folks don't want to see change, but change is, and will happen. It's really easy to misinterpret the code language. Disinformation travels at the speed of light and electrons, literally. A lot of folks were confused between code and aesthetics of buildings. There's significant misunderstanding of how property tax assessments happen, and also how what a neighboring property decides to do and develop affects your own property. So those were all some of our lessons learned, and I'll stick around for other questions.
And I just want to point out, and thank you, Missy, and thank you, Judd, for talking about that. I want to point out that Judd, Missy, and Ray-Jean Fossen, also from Lander, are going to be in the breakout room that has to do with changing codes and ordinances. So if you've got questions about that, you can join that room. And our last solution story presenter is Macy Miller, who's a tiny home builder and tiny home dweller in Moscow, Idaho. Go for it, Macy.
I'm trying here. I'm not sure.
Tech challenged.
You know, do you happen to have my slides? I don't know what's popping up here. I'm afraid I'm gonna.
I don't know how close at hand I have them. Marcy, do you have those pretty readily available? If I've got them.
Sorry.
Oh, Tiny have
Oh, wait,
slides.
here we go.
I have them.
think I had them. That's okay. You got them too.
All right.
Did that work?
That works.
Okay. So my name is Macy Miller. I'm a little bit different position than most of the people presenting. I'm just a person who lives in a tiny house. I built this tiny house 10 years ago. It's picked up a lot of steam. A lot of people identified with that as a valid choice moving forward to help their life. And it kind of became an accidental job for me. My actual background is architecture, but this journey has allowed me to sidestep that. And so everything I do now is just helping people navigate their own code systems. And I work kind of at a national level, international to a point, but mostly in the US. And I advocate that this is a new housing type. Everybody's first reaction is to take this and fit it into a ground-bound house, fit it into an RV, fit it into a trailer house. It's different than all of those. It does have to meet Department of Transportation standards because it's movable, but it also has to meet IRC standards, or some people, I'll talk about that in a second, are limiting that to meet RV codes or whatever in order to get some emergency housing solutions. The legal definition for a tiny house is under 400 square feet. That didn't exist 5 years ago. We made that legal. My personal tiny house is the one pictured. It's 232 square feet. I built it for under 12 grand 10 years ago and 18 months of weekends. It is IRC code compliant, and I know that because I helped write the IRC code for it. And it's where I've lived with this beautiful family for 10 years. I did it. This was my original house. I hated it. I never liked it. I had 4 bedrooms that were empty. I was stuck working all the time, which made me then hate my job. And I wasn't sure where I wanted to be. Like a 30-year mortgage didn't fit me. And I felt like the crushingness of that situation made me find another solution. And I would rather shuffle around in a small space like this than be crushed by debt on the day-to-day. While that's not uncommon whatsoever, it's not the only reason that people choose to live in a tiny house. There's a lot of people with disabled kids or parents who want them close but independent. Most people just want to pursue a passion. They're sick of working to upkeep their life. Or there's a lot of, with the internet and particularly the pandemic, there's a lot of digital nomads that can work from Zoom. And when you can do that, you can work from anywhere or everywhere and move around. A lot of people just want to avoid the excess that comes in a standard house. 10 years is a long time. The reason I keep doing it is because it works. My family has traveled the country. We travel as a regular part of our life. We focus on relationships. We currently live off-grid in Moscow, Idaho. Legally, it took me 9 years to get legal, but I'm finally there. And the projects differ from the others. They're occupant funded and they're occupant maintained. It's owner occupied housing. There's an asterisk with that I'll talk about in a second. Typically tiny houses start around 30,000 to 100,000. If you want a builder, that's gone up with the price of materials recently. But they're completely self-funded by the occupants themselves. We're told they're going to depreciate. I've seen some really shoddy ones depreciate, but I can sell my house for much more than I paid for it, as can a lot of other people. But technically they are a depreciating asset, or I guess liability, not an asset. But they're sustained by land host partnerships, which is a lot of the work that I do right now, hooking up landowners with tiny house owners. This is totally bootstrapped. This was literally crowdsourced. People from around the country flew my family to Kansas City to make a testimony in front of the International Code Council, which is how we got it incorporated into IRC. Now there's the trickle down, and my job primarily is helping people navigate their local code structures in order to get the tiny house appendix adopted, incorporated, and local zoning kind of flexed out so that it can happen. But a lot of this is just mass media momentum. We are seeing a lot of nonprofit participation, which is fabulous. Homeless shelters sort of situations where people can have a little more independence. And then another huge driving factor is schools, from elementary all the way up to high schools and trade schools. These are great projects to work on. So there's a source for house production, but it needs to get legalized. And we're not quite there. We've bounded over a lot of hurdles. But
about 1 minute, Macy.
Thank you. I'll rush through it. The benefits are pretty obvious. You're getting housing where housing's needed in cities near jobs. They're obviously cheaper than other types of housing. But they're also beneficial because there's a lot of people now trapped in cities who are house poor. Everything they own goes to maintaining this house. And this is a way that they can rent out a portion of their yard or something and offset that discrepancy. And then there's a lot of different methods of legalization popping up. LA legalize tiny houses on wheels, but they did it through ANSI codes, which ANSI is not life safety. It's a different thing, but it's justified because they're in an emergency housing situation and they need to change something. The way I'd like to see it go more mainstream is to be legalized through IRC. International Residential Code is the code that defines all dwellings, and it's a dwelling, so it should be under that code in my mind. Other people are doing RV zoning. That's how I'm legalized here in Moscow. And my main push, the way that I see them working the best, is under a model that most cities and jurisdictions have already, and that's the ADU. Instead of doing an ADU in the back, you can do an ADU pad for much less cost, and you offset that. Sorry, my dog. You can offset that by allowing the occupant to own the building and just rent out the space. And then if they need to pick up and move, I would love to see a network of ADU pads that tiny house dwellers could look up, rent from, and move on when that station of work is over or whatever. The biggest concerns are, how does the city tax these? I've got ideas on that. And inspections for code compliance. Are they inspected where they're built or where they're placed? That's something that needs to be handled left. And then zoning, which is getting done. My big push is the strength as an owner occupancy. A lot of people are trying to turn these into short-term rentals and make it an income property in a different way. But the owner occupancy is where the strength of a tiny house comes from. People who don't want to live in tiny houses don't have a good experience living in tiny houses. So the owner wants to be there, you should let them be there. And that's all I have.
Macy, thank you. And Macy's going to be in the tiny house and ADU, accessory dwelling unit, breakout group. So we're going to move into the breakout groups. Lori, while I am sharing my screen with the breakout group topics, you want to do one quick chatter file?
Yeah, so we're really curious, and I'm sure if you're like me, my brain is full, and you might need a minute to reflect on all the amazing solutions that you've heard about, and this might help you decide where you want to go for the remainder of our roundtable. So again, I'm going to give you the prompt and then have you wait to hit return until I say go. So what intrigued you as a potential solution you could apply in your community? And part two is, what would be your first step?